there anything you need to add?
I just have a question, I guess.
Okay.
Mr. Urban. If the minimum lot size waiver is approved, that's also required for the outdoor.
We'll
correct?
consider that a second time, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's, again, this is really,
So you're
he's
considering
talking
only
about
for the
two,
indoor at this point?
yes, because he's asking for two separate phases in my mind, that, one could proceed without necessarily the second one if you chose to not approve the other waivers or lot size or any other condition, the CUP rather. So, it's almost like the times when we have two separate applications, although it's wrapped into one, there's two different conditions in my mind, or phases.
Okay. Commissioners, clear as mud?
Just on the indoor storage, lot size waiver first.
All right. You've heard what the administrator recommends that we consider first. As chair, I'll open it up for motions for those two issues to be considered first. Mr. King?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'll preface this with the observation and then the limitation that this is limited in scope to the indoor portion only. I will move for approval of the minimum lot size waiver made in this application. The justification for this is similar to the earlier application, in as much as I do not believe an application such as this was contemplated in the existing regulations, and I believe it represents an undue hardship to expect a 3-acre minimum for an application of this nature.
Okay.
all I've
And
got.
so are you going to include the conditional use waiver also, or?
No, that's a
Okay.
separate,
Nope.
that's a
Okay.
separate.
All right.
Nope.
Okay,
Stay
you've
with
heard,
program.
you've heard the motion as presented. It's on the minimum lot size waiver. Mr. King, do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, I have a second, Mr. Horton. All right, any discussion on the first waiver, which is the minimum lot size? Any discussion? Okay, we can probably do these waivers by voice vote. Sure. Okay. Let's just do this by voice vote on the waivers, on the waiver portion, instead of doing the individual called votes.
Visual raise their hand.
Yes. Okay, all those in favor of the minimum lot size waiver request signify by raising your hand. Okay. Looks like it's unanimous. All those opposed? Okay. That waiver passes. Now, the chair would consider the next waiver, Mr. Urban.
Well, it's
would
not
you
a
outline
waiver,
it?
no.
Sorry?
It's the conditional use
Yep.
for the indoor storage. And again, in your staff report, you have things that you need to consider, that this conditional use would be essential or desirable to the community and not in conflict with the elements, objectives, and policies of the comprehensive plan. There's a checklist of things that you can use to include in your motion if you so desire. And also, you have justification statement from the applicant or the opponents, if that's what you're interested in. The only condition I think that's applicable at this point is that this one does not include outdoor storage at this point. So it would be for the indoor storage only, and it would be for the plan that was submitted July 24th, 2018.
Okay. All right. Mr. Carter, anything you need to add to that? No. Okay. All right, Commissioners, you've heard the request here. What's the pleasure of the commission as far as a motion? This is on the conditional use waiver. Mr. King?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Once again, this is a limited scope motion. It only relates to the indoor portion of the presentation made. I'll move for approval of the conditional use permit for indoor storage. Based on testimony and evidence presented, I find that it integrates properly into the community and the general surroundings. The character and objectives, potential impacts are appropriate based on testimony and evidence presented. I believe, based on the volume of requests we've had of this nature today, that there is a demand for this type of service and this type of facility. And I find that the use is compatible with surrounding land uses and the general character of the area.
Okay. Mr. Carter?
All right, so you had a condition of approval and a limitation that it is limited to the plan presented today, which I would incorporate into the motion, and
For
the condition,
indoor storage only.
indoor only.
Mr. Carter, is that adequate?
Yes.
Okay. I've got a motion on the floor on the conditional use waiver. Do we have a second? I'll second it. Okay. Got, looks like let's see, Mr. Falvey, I'm sorry. Seconds. All right, any discussion now on the motion to approve the waiver request? Mr. Douglas?
I do have a question.
I'm
It's a
sorry,
conditional
conditional
use.
use? Yeah, just conditional use. Mark that out, sorry.
My question is regarding the developmental plan for the indoor storage.
Well, and that would be the,
I know it's the next one.
floor
Or on
plan
down.
that was
Are we
submitted.
separating the developmental plan for the indoor-outdoor storage?
Yeah, you're jumping ahead a little bit, but the indoor would be for the development of indoor storage, and it seemed to me that in the application, there was at least a preliminary floor plan. It showed, I forget what the total is here, but in the packet you have, there are 2 floor plans. So that would be, just like the last time, we only accepted half the building for indoor storage. You have 2 floors. These are the documents I'm looking at
Right.
that were submitted by the applicant. So that would be your kind of development plan for the indoor storage, but not for the outside.
Right. I just wanted to make sure that's a clarification that we're using these. Okay.
All right. Any further discussion? Any further discussion? Okay, and this is on the conditional use, and so we probably should vote that.
Yes.
Roll call. Roll call vote on that. We will do a roll call vote on this one, and because this is a conditional use, and this is to approve the conditional use on the indoor storage. Correct, Mr. King?
That's correct.
Okay. All right. So, Ms. Nunn, if you would take the vote. This is a motion to approve.
Ms. Bonet?
Yes.
Ms. Crosby?
Yes.
Mr. Douglas?
Yes.
Mr. Falvey?
Yes.
Mr. Finney?
Yes.
Mr. Halfling?
Yes.
Mr. Hampton?
Yes.
Mr. Horton? Mr. King?
Yes.
Mr. Klingenfuss? Bus?
Yes.
Mr. Mesker?
Yes.
And Ms. Smith?
Yes.
Right. On docket PZ 18015, the conditional use request on the indoor storage has been approved on a vote of 12-0. So now,
Okay.
Mr. Urban, let's outline the next portion.
Right, so on the next piece, and I'm going to see if I can give you all a little direction of what I've been thinking of here. There's the lot size waiver, the parking waiver, landscape and screening waiver, then there's a conditional use and a development plan. And the applicant is asking for direction before, and he admittedly did not have much detail in the development plan, which is what you all were grappling with. You heard testimony in opposition of some of these waivers as well. So what you have to consider is, in my mind, whether or not any, and you would take all of these separately. All of the waiver requests we're going to consider separately. The direction I think you might want to go in is that if you are considering approval of the waivers, that at best, you should table the development plan. So now the applicant has the details of the approvals, and he can come back with a development plan for review, and you have now preserved, because there are so many questions about what's really going outside, you've preserved the ability to approve or deny the development plan based on whether or not you've granted these waivers. And you don't necessarily have to grant all of them, but if you do, at least the applicant knows where to go. And I would say then table the development plan, allow them to come back with a detailed plan. If you choose to deny these, then some of them could be denied, and then he has to deal with that scope, or you can deny all of them, of course, because you've heard testimony from adjoining landowners' representatives that they're not in agreement with all these waivers. So I think, again, at best, consider the waivers. If they're, if you should choose to deny all of them, at least the applicant knows to come back with a development plan that complies with those denials or approvals.
Let me ask, Mr. Urban, if the waivers were not granted, can he still proceed with what we've already passed? Can he proceed with the indoor storage moving forward?
Yes,
With the waivers that have been, the one waiver that has been approved,
you've granted it.
we granted it, but the other 4 waivers relate to the outdoor storage, correct?
Correct.
Okay,
Yep.
all right. So I'm just thinking, if the commission decides to table the development plan, is that a vote we should take first, or should we vote on the waivers and
You
then?
have to do, you have to do the waivers first,
Okay.
because the development plan is incomplete.
Okay.
And it's incomplete because the waivers haven't been granted. You must do the waivers first.
Okay,
So I'm suggesting, again, that you consider the waivers, and whatever the result of that consideration is, that you end up with a development plan at your table. What's that?
I don't want to confuse anyone, but you might consider voting on the conditional use permit for the outdoor storage first, because if you don't agree with that use at all, then there's no point in even applying for the
Okay.
waivers.
that's kind of what I was thinking, but I'm not the administrator.
Well, but we've been taking the waivers first and then the conditional use. So I was sticking with the same procedure. But at this point, it's so confusing. I think what's the most important thing is that the development plan not be considered. You can't consider the conditional use if you don't have the waivers, because his application is different. We've heard numbers about how many spaces outside.
Mr.
It's a chicken and egg.
Mr. Chairman.
But again, I'm sticking with the
Could I have a
same
point of
procedure
order? I
we've
have
been
a
using all
question.
day.
Sure, go ahead.
The point of order is that, how do we approve a conditional use permit without a developmental plan in front of us to look to see how we approve the rest of the waivers or the conditional use permit?
Well, that's why I was talking about the waivers first.
But
That
how do
may
we
lead you to
approve the
whether or not
waivers?
the conditional use is even reasonable or not. I mean, it's a confusing procedure, so.
Point of order
I
again.
think his point is, though, is,
Hold on a second.
I think his point is he doesn't know if it's feasible. If you're not going to approve the waivers, then he may as well not even ask for a conditional use permit for the outdoor storage,
and that's
because he
my
doesn't have
point.
enough space.
And that's my point. You can't have the conditional use as he's considering it, because now the development plan changes and the conditional use changes. So maybe if you consider the waivers and not consider the conditional use until he comes back with a plan, I mean, I don't know, but I'm trying to make it as simple as possible based on the procedure we've been using to this point, which is waivers first.
Hold on a second. Now, let me ask Mr. Carter for the legal side of this.
Well, from a legal standpoint, I think you ought to consider the conditional use permit first, because if you approve the waivers, then you've approved the site for a outdoor storage facility. And the next step that has to be taken is whether or not you approve the development. So I think from a legal perspective, probably ought to decide first on whether or not you want to approve the conditional use as of the outdoor storage, because that's the fundamental issue.
Okay? So
And from a legal perspective, I would feel uncomfortable approving the site for outdoor storage and thinking then you could come back and stop that use.
Well,
I mean, that's just from a legal perspective. I mean, it's just not a very clean way to do it.
I don't understand how you can put conditions on a conditional use if you don't know whether he's going to have to comply with the landscape regulations or not, because you've waived them.
Well,
So if you were to approve a conditional use, you place conditions, and that would be that you comply with all the regulations. Well, you haven't considered the waivers.
well, but if the board approves the conditional use permit, we can turn right around and consider the waivers.
Okay?
But can that be contingent?
It would all be contingent on a
Well,
development plan being approved.
Everything's contingent on.
Well,
Wait a minute, I'm,
Why don't we take
so,
a-
so,
why
so,
don't we take a 5-minute recess?
yeah.
Okay, let's take a 5-minute recess and we don't, everybody stay here and then we'll go out and discuss,
We can just discuss it
Discuss
right
it here
here and then figure
and
out the best
legally.
way to- best way
Okay.
to